of all, thank you for taking time to chat with me. Really enjoyed the film.
Great. Yeah,
So,
thanks for having me.
yeah, so I think that, in many ways, Neighborhood Watch feels like a very old school throwback film, but it also
Okay.
never feels like nostalgia bait. It never feels like it's merely like a copycat. How do you kind of find your own style while like referencing like an established grammar?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess it feels throwbacky because it is somewhat straightforward and it's kind of a genre blend. We looked at Midnight Run, the writer Sean Farley, that was one of his inspirations from the late 80s, and so I discovered that movie and it works on a lot of levels as a comedy and drama and an action movie. And it seems like movies were able to do that more in the past, like be multiple things. And so that's part of why I guess it's kind of throwbacky. Um, and then I really like contemporary settings. Or honestly, I don't. I mean, this is like a huge conundrum for filmmakers now is like, how do you shoot a screen? Cars don't look as interesting, TVs don't look as interesting. So you can either set things in the past, all right, when you had more texture to the world, or you can just like create your own sort of Tarantino-esque world, right, where you just like kind of throw historical accuracy to the wind and just put in your movie what you want. Or do stuff like It Follows, where instead of a cell phone, you can have a seashell phone, right? And honestly, I try my best to embrace what the world looks like now, right? And I was a little resistant to giving Ed that car from 1991 because who drives those now? And it does feel like, oh, we're just cheating because we're like, the car looks cool. Ultimately, it came down, we didn't really have any other options, and the car looked cool. Like it's got a red interior. This is going to be an ongoing problem or challenge. But yeah, I like setting movies in where we're shooting and the year that we're shooting. So the story happened in Birmingham, Alabama in the fall of 2023.
You mentioned how there's like a lot of buddy comedy elements in it. The Midnight Run thing is definitely something I picked up on, and I think a lot of the success of that is the chemistry between Jack Quaid and Jeffrey Dean Morgan. How do you work with them, to kind of build this dynamic?
Well, we felt it out together. We we didn't have any time for rehearsal, but there was a long on-ramp to getting the movie made, so I had time to get to know them a little bit remotely. And Jack and I, we traded research materials, and Jeff and I talked a lot about like what Ed's deal is, just through personal experience or theories. It's kind of like a sandbox where there's no bad ideas, right? And I'm very collaborative. I like, we had Sean Farley, the writer, come up with an extensive backstory for both characters. He's great at that. And then when we got together, the first few days of shooting, we're just kind of like stumbling around in the dark. And I think it helped to have like uh, the wardrobe from Rachel C. Wilson helped define their characters, and then the hair and everything helped get them into the look. But yeah, it was a little bit of what are we doing? But then when a moment would happen that felt right, I would just make sure to let them know. That felt very Simon to me. That felt very Ed to me, and so we would go in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's kind of fair to say Neighborhood Watch is part of what I would call almost a dying breed, which is 90-minute thrillers. Not to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
that every movie needs to be shorter. There are great like 3-hour epics, but
yeah.
what do you think are the merits of this very lean approach, like what you took with this film?
Yeah, so that feeling I've had, I'm sure a lot of people have. I guess I'm a very like my therapist calls me very morally driven. And I guess I have a very strong sense of like what I think is right and wrong. And I thought all people did. Like we all watch this Shawshank Redemption and we root for Tim Robbins, right? You root for the good guys. Um but I just feel that very strongly. And it went, one example was like when I became a vegan, I've learned about like what goes on in the animal factory farming industry, and it was such a nightmare. And I was like, I got to tell everybody about this. And then a lot of my friends and family were like, "You're in a cult, and you're talking too much about this." So that just made me feel like out of touch with people and the world. And I guess that's kind of what Simon feels. That's what Tyler feels in Clofitch, you know?
Absolutely. And, I think another important aspect of this film's success is that you don't ever make fun of Simon's condition. How do you kind of approach depicting a character with schizophrenia in such a sensitive way?
Well, Ed makes fun of him, and I kind of like that part of the script because somebody that you can make, it's almost a sign of respect. It's more
Yeah,
of like, you're
that
a person.
he
Yeah?
never feels like the butt of the joke is more what I'm saying. It never feels like it's like victimizing
Yeah.
him.
No, yeah. Um, Well, yeah, I tread carefully, did a lot of research, talked to Sean Farley, the writer, who had a family member who suffered from schizophrenia, and just did as much research as I could to try to understand what it was like for somebody who was going through this. I thought certainly didn't want to be offensive or condescending, but also it's not like an untouchable topic. It's a human experience.
But no, I think both of the performances that you get in this film for your lead performances are great. I think that Jack Quaid's performance is very complex and unlike anything we've seen him do before. How did you know he was the right person for this role?
He was a fan of the Clofidge Killer. I know that he's very talented, and it just came together for that reason. The role was good for somebody of Jack's age, and we wanted to work together. And he responded to the material. He's very open to trying things and making himself vulnerable and experimenting. He'll do like 5 takes, and every take has like a slightly different interpretation. And so he gives you a lot to work with, and it also really helps to like dial in exactly what the wavelength is.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, with Jeffrey D. Morgan, we get to see a side of him that we don't often get to see from him. It's like there's the gruffness that we know from him is like the facade in this role.
Hmm.
There's like a warmer, more vulnerable side underneath it. How do you work with him to, bring out these elements in this character?
Jeffrey is a sweet guy,
Yeah.
and he we talked on Zoom before we met, before he agreed to do it, and we connected over a lot of things. And there were just moments that, as we were working it out while we were shooting, if something happened that I felt like was particularly Ed, um, I would I would let him know, and keep going in that direction. Um, and Jeff was not expecting the level of indie that this movie was. He he was game though. He was game. At the end of the shoot when he rapped and everybody was clapping for him. He's like, "Let's do it in 25 days next time."
Yeah,
He also like petitioned to shoot multiple cameras,
absolutely.
as he's used to on TV. And it just wasn't that kind of thing. But thankfully he's like very understanding, and I think he understood that it was an opportunity to do something different, that to remind the audience of like what he can do, because he's like a very talented actor.
And I think something that's very interesting about your career, especially within the independent scene that you don't see a lot, is that you are a director who's not also a writer. How do you kind of select which scripts that you want to work on? Because a lot of independent filmmakers have their own scripts. You get the
Yeah.
luxury of
Well,
selecting.
I'm trying to rectify that situation, Sean. I was writing the whole time after Clovitch came out, and I couldn't get to a point where I was satisfied with what I had. And It's not for a shortage of ideas. It's more of that when I'm writing by myself, it starts to feel like a hall of mirrors. And I'm really better at having somebody to bounce off ideas and kind of acting as guardrails. So I am continuing to write, and I did something with Sean, the writer of Neighborhood Watch. We collaborated on something, and the way it worked is I wrote kind of like I fleshed out the story for the most part, brought it to him. We worked out the second half of the movie, and then he wrote the script. Turned out amazing. It's called Hauntville. I'd love to make that. And now I'm co-writing another one called Funny Bunny. It's a serial killer mystery. So I, it took 6 years between Clofitch and this one simply because I'm picky. It wasn't for shortage of scripts. This was the first one that I responded to, and I have to be emotionally connected to the material or I just can't do it. So the conclusion I've come to is I gotta write my own stuff, and that means co-writing, and that means like just sitting my butt down every day, doing what Stephen King and so many other writers say is like treat it like a job, you know? So that's what I'm doing.